split, so let's turn to that now and have a minute for the close of the service. Two things I want to say before I begin my sermon. For those of you that are in the habit of picking up one of my printouts of my sermon before services, I do apologize. I sat down on the computer this morning and started to run off. I got 3 copies run off. One for me, one for Nancy, when she says she knows what to do. And then I had somebody confiscate the other one. I'm not going to say who.
I'll turn it back in now.
She's going to turn it back in. But I do apologize for that. I will have copies ready for you next week. Second, I want to talk about John Keeney for a while. John was a good man. He and I were real special friends. And he attended a church in Chesapeake during the 7.5 years that I preached there. No, 10 years that I preached there. I'm sorry, I was thinking of another congregation. But John was one of these people that I believe, but I just can't do it. I just can't accept him. And I heard that over and over again from John, and every time we would sing the invitation, you would see the knuckles on his hand gripping the seat in front of him. And I talked to him many times. And he just would shake his head, no, I just can't do it. Many of you know Larry Inslee. He's preached for me a couple times since I've been here. Larry was telling me, about a year or so ago, that he was talking to John. He looked at John, he said, now John, why? Be honest with me, why? And John made the statement, he says, I just am so shy, I cannot walk in front of the church. I don't want to walk in front of the people. So Larry went and called the preacher. And then they went in the church with only a few people there, and he was baptized into Christ. Only because he was shy. I don't feel that it is necessary for somebody to come forward during service. If you are not a Christian and you want to make a confession of your faith to other people, we can arrange a private baptism if that's what you need or whatever. But I just wanted to share that with you. John is 78 years of age. He was in the nursing home over in South Point, Burlington, and now he's with the Lord. I want to assure you all one thing, and I'm saying this for the benefit of my 2 children that are here this morning. I was a little boy. Steve just looked at me kind of funny when I said that. And when I was a little boy, I was a chubby little thing. I was always chubby. My dad used to say he'd rather have a grocery bill than a doctor bill, and he fed us anything we wanted to eat. But in the Sunday school program that I went to was in the northern part of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. In fact, we lived in the suburbs. Bellevue is the name of the small community in which we lived in. And we attended what was called the Bellevue Christian Church. And I can remember some of the things that we used to do as far as the Sunday school program was concerned. It was a fairly large church, maybe 200 or 300. But in our Sunday school program, there was a memorization achievement program. After you said so many memory verses, you got a prize. And after you get each prize, got a little bit more. The more verses you learned, the greater the prize was. And I can remember some of the memory verses, even to this particular day, that we learned during that time of Sunday school. And the reason I bring this up, the text for my message this morning was one of the hardest verses for me to remember. Even today, I have to go to the scriptures and to read it to be able to assure that I get it correct. And the passage of Scripture that I'm talking about is found in the Sermon on the Mount that the Sermon on the Mount we referred to last week. But in the 7th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus makes this statement, says, "Therefore all things whatsoever you would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them. For this is the law and the prophets." The same verse of Scripture is found in Luke, the 2nd chapter, where it says, "Do unto others as you would have others do unto you." Now, the reason why that particular verse was so hard for me to remember was very simply, some of the adults in that particular day, and I think you'll hear it today, would change their wording around just a little bit. And I used to hear the comment, "Do unto others before they do unto you." Now I see my son shaking his head in agreement with that particular comment. Another, "Do unto others as they did to you." Get even. And I want you to think about that just for a while. Isn't it unfortunate that in our world today, and I'm speaking of the world in its entirety, not just our nation, that the misquotes are practiced more than the actual wording of Jesus Christ? Before church started, I always talked to several of the people here in the church, and they said I can use their comments as long as I don't use their name. But some of us, we were talking about the things that was happening up around Charleston. And while there was some suspicion as to the motivation behind all this, that was money and greed and so forth, because some of the things that were brought out was the idea that there is a lot of people that are gouging in prices to sell the water. And I like what the Attorney General of West Virginia said. He said, "I'm going to monitor this. If I find anybody gouging," he said, "we're going to prosecute them to the full degree of the law." And I agree with that. Last night, as I was listening to the news and turned off the ball game because the ball game got out of hand as far as I was concerned, I heard a comment being made that of all the things we're reporting of different incidences that were happening, and some of the things that were happening were good. Really, the fulfillment of the thing that Jesus said. But at the very end, she said, the announcer made a comment, says there were 27 fights reported as a result of over the water issue. 27 fights. It's strange in my mind that as much emphasis that has been placed upon the idea of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And every writings of the apostles, Paul and Luke and John and Peter and James, emphasize the very same thing. That we find that there are many people that do not practice what Jesus said. If you allow your minds to go back to the time that Jesus made this comment, it wasn't a resolution that he was trying to put out, it was a revolution. I want you to think about that for a while, because if you look at the history of the Jews, for years, centuries, they were under the oppression of other governments. And before Babylon came into being and took them off into captivity, there were other nations that were stronger than they were, that were always trying to get their piece of property, their nation, because of the strategic place that it played in the Middle East at that particular time. Babylon, then the Medes and the Persians, which allowed them to come back home, the Greeks and the Romans. And as you begin to think about this, only a short period of time, and some 400 and some years, were they able to have independence, and that was under the Maccabean rule. Oh, and they at that particular time, they were compelled by Roman law to really go the second mile whenever they were commanded to do so. As you think of the 6th chapter of the book of Luke, if somebody asks you to go 1 mile, you go the second mile. If somebody asks you for your coat, you give them your cloak also. These are the words of Jesus. So how strange would it have been in a nation that was so impressed and so depressed with all this particular thing that was taking place, for them to be able to know, here's somebody saying, you do to them what you would have them do to you. Somebody might say, well, that was back then. That was way back then, when the contrast between the national thinking was so such a great contrast. Way back then. What about today? Oh, I could quote. What about the situation with Christie in New Jersey? About their bridge thing, which was supposed to have been done in retaliation. I served a community one time in which the Christian service camp was almost destroyed by this idea of getting even. Paybacks are such great fun. It got to the point